Split Tube Media and the Cinesthesia podcast present a special daily October podcast. Help to the king.
This is going to be the ultimate metatextual King episode.
Yes.
Because there's almost nothing to say about the film itself, but there's so much to say about the film's presence.
Well, yeah, this film only exists as a reflection of the other version, right? It's not... When you watch it, that's the only way you can process it.
It's the only... Yeah, there's no other reason for it to be made.
No.
It's settling a grudge. The film we are talking about on this night, the 26th of Rocktober.
This isn't Rocktober, jeez.
This is the least Rocktober. Yeah. Well, I don't know. We had AC/DC in Maximum Overdrive.
We did.
And we had the Ramones in Pet Sematary.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, you know. And if we sort of bring In the Mouth of Madness into the Stephen King universe through Sutter Kane, you have John Carpenter's Rock Band.
Yeah, all right. Fine. You've earned it. You've earned your right to call it Rocktober.
You've earned it.
I'm going to stick with October so no one gets confused about it being the 8th month of the year.
October.
I like to keep things clean and straight.
All right. We're here on number 26 of Hail to the King with the longest piece of anything we've watched yet.
Yeah.
This is a good choice for us to, at the end of this month, make an even longer process.
Jason, the video that I believe we both watched this from is a digital rip of a VHS copy off of this playing on television, including all the commercials, but specifically recorded by someone in New Hampshire recording off WMUR, the station I would have been watching this on had I watched it when it originally aired.
That did excite me, and made me also want to find a copy from the Virginia market.
Right? There's, Jason, 28 minutes into the video, there's an ad for Ippolito's Furniture Store, and it's a New Hampshire accent, but definitely the most honest New England accent we've heard in this full month.
That is true. That is true. So the what we're talking about here, dear listener, constant Weta, is the Shining. We're talking about The Shining today.
The Shining.
No, not that Shining.
Wait, what?
Not.
But Jason, there's only one The Shining.
Not the classic horror film starring Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall, directed by Stanley Kubrick. This is I don't know what that character that is.
Keep it up.
What bit that
Keep
is.
it up.
This is the TV movie miniseries of The Shining.
Yeah.
That it's The Shining done right.
Can you imagine, Jason?
Fuck you, Stanley Kubrick edition of The Shining.
Can you imagine it's 1994 and you're Rebecca De Mornay and you get a phone call from Stephen King and he's like, "Hey, I'm making The Shining, but good this time. Can you bring to life the character that Shelley Duvall could not successfully?" How do you say yes to that?
Well, it's. I do think
I don't understand how they got anyone agree to be in this.
Well, so
money, I guess, but still
money. But also, so this at this point in time, it's sort of the difference of it's 17 years later. Right, like Kubrick's Shining is in 1980, and Stephen King's Shining adaptation is from 1997. And in between there, Stephen King had gone from a popular genre novelist to one of the most famous writers of all time.
Sure,
and he had already done a few years back the miniseries of The Stand,
Okay.
That he had written and produced, and had Mick Garris, his dude, direct, who also directed this. Mm-hmm. And that was very successful and very popular and very critically acclaimed. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of he was on top of the world, and literally the way the story gets told is like, it was, Stephen, you've conquered everything now, like, what do you want to do next? And what he said was, I want to take The Shining back.
Right.
I want to get it back from Kubrick.
That still doesn't answer my question for how he got Steven Weber to agree to not be Jack Nicholson.
Well, so somebody like Steven Weber, I understand. Here's the thing about Steven Weber. I like Steven Weber a lot. Sure. I think he's a really good actor.
Sure.
When you go and read what people write about this TV show, mm-hmm. it becomes quickly apparent that very few people actually understand what Steven Weber is capable of as an actor.
Sure.
And I could absolutely see him being like, I really need to shake my wings image. Mm-hmm. Like, people refer to this. I don't think people actually see the performance he's turning in this film, which is actually mm-hmm. quite good.
It's pretty good.
I don't think he is given. I think all the performers, but particularly Weber and De Mornay, are doing good work, and they're not being particularly well served or protected.
Yes.
By the filmmakers.
Yes.
AKA Stephen King and Mick Garris.
Well, here's the thing, Jason, is I agree. I think that they all do. I don't think there's I think there is, we'll come to it later, I think there is one performance in this movie that runs circles around the rest of them. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I felt like everyone was like turning in fine to good work. Mm-hmm. But I do think that Mick Garris is a hack. Jason, I looked him up because he's come up 3 times now, right? Mm-hmm. He's the dude that King brings in to direct things. And I was like,
his career is the King adapter.
Well, so I looked him up, and aside from a few King adaptations, he's made a bunch of behind-the-scenes featurettes, and he's directed episodes of television, and he's gotten 2 episodes of Masters of Horror, which blew my mind until I realized that he created the series Masters of Horror. And then I was like, oh, he's Chris Hardwick.
He has a Fangoria podcast.
He's just a big fanboy nerd who has forcefully inserted himself into the industry despite not being good at it.
Yeah. Well, but he's inserted himself largely by, and I don't want to. He seems like a nice guy. Like, he's not.
Yeah, everyone says he's a delight.
Right. So like the Chris Hardwick comparison breaks down pretty hard.
It breaks down immediately right there because he's clearly an asshole.
I don't want
to. Hey, Nerdist, put us on your podcast network.
I don't want to disparage Mick Garris as a person. He seems like a totally lovely person.
He's just not a director. Is what
cares about what he's doing, but I don't think
he's not good at it.
No. It does make me wish. Not that I actually wish we'd done this because of the time involved, but it does make me wish that
we
I
had financed
watched The Stand.
Another version of this miniseries directed by Paul Thomas Anderson.
Well, I do wish that we'd watched The Stand only because... Sure. So I was thinking that having watched Sleepwalkers, it would be enough of a comparison point. But like, Sleepwalkers is insane.
It's
and
super
Mick Garris
bonkers.
Is not making necessarily all
any decisions at all.
But he's got some kind kind of a pulse going on, which he does not in this adaptation.
Not even a little bit.
But I think part of that is because the project of the Shining TV adaptation is not to make a new Shining movie. It is to, point by point, in a very belabored and steady manner, illustrate all of the things that Kubrick left out. And I would be interested to see now, just as like a last point of comparison, what Garris and King do with a project where King doesn't have that kind of a grudge going on, where all he's trying to do is make the best version of his own thing, as opposed to like lay out an argument about somebody else's version, which is what this movie is doing.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it is also trying to be a movie, but I believe that is its second goal. Jason, this film, are we calling it a film? Sure.
I don't.
This series of images starts with the first thing that happens is Pat Hingle, real hero, shows Steven Weber how to blow up the building with the thing in the basement. That's the first thing that happens. He's like, hey, everybody, here's the thing to remember. This is how you blow up the building. Yeah. And as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, that makes sense, because this is going to be a movie where a man grapples with evil and then it's ultimately redeemed, because that is what Stephen King writes, and that's not what Kubrick's The Shining is, because Kubrick's...
Correct.
We talked about this a little bit in the first one, but I think we sort of theorized that the reason that he hates it so much is because he took Stephen King's personal life story out of it and put Kubrick's own personal life story in it, right? It's about his addiction instead of King's. And I was like, oh, that's exactly what this is going to be. In this one, he's going to grapple with evil. He's never going to be fully evil, and then he's going to win at the end by blowing up the building. And then 6 hours later, that happened.
Yes. Yeah. Finally.
I feel like I could have just watched the first 3 minutes and been okay.
Oh, and when everything's thoroughly telegraphed and over-explained, and there's so many redundant scenes, and part of that is just television in 1997.
Sure.
That's sort of like the rules is you have to assume that,
people are tuning in.
Half of your audience is tuned in for the first time halfway through the third part of a 3-part series.
Yeah.
But oh boy.
Jason, the thing that I always hear... So there's a bunch of stuff in this that's different than Kubrick's The Shining, which was the only version of The Shining I was familiar with previously.
Yes.
But the thing that I've always heard when people are mad at Kubrick's The Shining is that Jack Nicholson begins the movie as a crazy person who is unhinged.
Yes.
But Steven Weber also begins this movie as a psychopath who is unhinged. Well, so I don't... What are they complaining about? He does... 2 minutes after meeting him, he makes a casual joke about a man doing dental work with a shotgun when he learns about a guy committing suicide. He's a full psychopath. He also, just before the movie starts, has a Chicago-style incident where he beats up a student at the school. He's not allowed back at the school he was teaching at because he beat up a student. He's a maniac.
He is... So here's the thing, is that he's yes, but he also has all of these other aspects that come out as well. Like all of these these very clear human compulsions to get better and be a better husband and be a better father. And I think one of the things I actually admire about Weber's performance, I don't think that it's being translated or captured well enough, but he is acting like 6 or 7 different feelings about most different scenes. And I think the complaint about Nicholson is that Nicholson is one note. Nicholson is just starts as crazy Jack Nicholson and only gets crazier, whereas
so it's not that he starts there so much. It's just that Steven Weber is conflicted the whole time. For the full movie. So neither of them has a real progression, but one of them is conflicted the full time, and the other one is just a crazy guy the whole time.
Yeah, one struggles and has an arc, and the other just moves forward like a shark.
I would debate that Steven Weber's character has an arc.
Yeah, no, I think he does, because he goes from self-pity to self-sacrifice. That's the arc, right? Everything at the beginning is, oh, poor me, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, and it's the self-pity and the anger that the ghosts play on to turn him evil.
Sure.
And his arc is, getting over himself. It 100% is the Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-step,
for sure.
Make amends and
give up to a
take
higher
responsibility
power
and give up to a higher power. The higher power in this instance is his son.
Right,
but that is also very Stephen King.
Yeah, and, of course.
Very so that's the arc there. Whereas Nicholson doesn't have an arc so much as just a sharp incline.
Sure. I'll take that. I feel like he goes back and forth between those two things pretty constantly the whole movie. But one definitely does win at the end, and one doesn't win at the beginning. So I guess
I don't mean it's strictly shaped as an arc. I just mean that's his struggle, and then he ends up in one. He starts in one place and then ends up in another.
Sure.
In that way. One of the other major. So this is actually, I've been doing a little bit more research into King's problems with the original Shining, having partially because I was watching this movie for 6 hours and it only requires you to look at it for 20% of that tops.
Yes.
And so I was doing a lot of Googling when I wasn't being distracted by the amazing mind-melting commercials that were captured on this.
Yes.
Including one McDonald's commercial that had an old lady holding a hamburger up and said, "This is how I keep you under my spell."
This is hot. This is fresh.
This is why you were powerless under my spell.
But, so, one of the funniest and also sort of saddest things about the making of this TV miniseries is that King needed Kubrick's permission to do it.
Why?
Because he still owned the rights.
Whoa.
It was Kubrick and Warner Brothers jointly, I think, still owned the rights to the movie.
That's crazy.
Or to the book to make it a movie. So in order to be able to make his own version, King needed Kubrick to sign off.
Yeah.
And the condition was that King had to stop bad-mouthing the 1980 film, which is why it's actually really hard, I think, to find details now of what King didn't like about it. The only thing that the agreement even specifically said that he was still allowed to criticize Jack Nicholson's performance. And so that's why that's the one thing that you always hear, because that's the only thing after 1997 that King was like contractually allowed to talk about.
That's amazing.
And I think I think it's like loosening up on him a little bit now.
Sure.
And he's been talking about it a little bit more.
Sure. Well, yeah, Kubrick's dead. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. He outlived him.
Who's going to sue him? Yeah.
There's that amazing recording of King at a talk being like, Stanley Kubrick, I outlived him. I even got hit by a car and I outlived him. But so some of the other things that King really objected to, I mean, the way he wraps it up, the way he sums it up is that, like, Kubrick's adaptation is cold and King's adaptation is warm. You know, Kubrick's adaptation ends with, Jack freezing out in the cold, and King's version ends with him literally the whole thing in a fireball and him telling his son that he loves him. Yeah. So, like, those are very stark differences. But one of the most interesting things that King was really mad about and used to talk about more, I found out. This goes to one of the things that we've discussed on this podcast is the overall treatment of women and wives in King films, and how that may or may not differ from actual King works, because the character of Wendy in this and in the King novel is a genuine force.
Yes.
And one of the things that King hated about the Kubrick Shining is that he took Shelley Duvall and just had her play a screaming, crying, weakling. And King's major complaint was like it was so misogynistic,
which is interesting because
really unhappy.
I mean, on some levels that is true, but during this film, I really appreciated Kubrick's choice. I usually I'm not on the side of making women pitiful nothings, but in this, and maybe I don't know, maybe it just requires a ramping up of Jack Nicholson, and maybe Jack Nicholson is enough in that if she had been the way that Rebecca De Mornay portrays her, he still could have completely overpowered her. But in this movie, they're just scrapping. You're never like, oh, he is gonna murder her. Yeah. You're just like, oh, this man is coming after this woman with a club, and she's probably gonna kneecap him.
Yeah. Yeah, she's almost too strong, but it also changes it. It changes the focus, right? Because the whole point of Kubrick just distills The Shining down to the sort of environmental and tonal horror elements, and he just takes it to murder, right? Which, when you actually then go into what King's Shining is about, it isn't about that. You even have at the end, the ghosts stopping Steven Weber, being like, look, you can kill her later. I know that's what you want to do. But what we need you to do is get us your son. Because the whole idea in this is that the ghosts are more powerful because they're feeding off the power that's in the boy.
Right.
And, if they can somehow just, kidnap and bully and terrorize the boy into doing their bidding, they're going to become so much more powerful in the world.
Right.
And it's like this whole other fantasy conceit that Kubrick has no interest in whatsoever.
Right. And it's why The Shining doesn't matter in Kubrick's movie.
Yeah.
Because in this movie, the movie starts with the kid being a competent and acknowledged psychic.
Yeah.
And then he's just, and then it's what they eat, right? It is what makes the building allow itself to be evil.
Yeah, and like some of that is just plot differences, but it really does actually get to the core of what kind of a story it is. Because Kubrick's story is just, it's the unlocking of the human potential for cruelty and destruction. It's the whole movie is just, it's taking that and playing it out to an extreme. And that one of the reasons the movie's so good is because it does just cut away everything that isn't that. It just hones right in, and it puts you in that space, and it keeps you in that space, and you don't get to escape until the end.
Yeah.
Whereas King's Shining is trying to be a much more expansive, epic story
it's
with all kinds of
place.
different
It's trying to do a bunch of things.
Which I think, in the hands of somebody who wasn't Mick Garris, and somebody who wasn't a very begrudging Stephen King, could become a really good movie. There's a good movie in here.
I would be curious to see a different person's version of this film.
Yeah.
Based on the script, rewrites aloud, because there's some stuff in there where it's like, he holds up 3 fingers and yells, "Read between the lines," and you're like, oh my god, please stop trying to not be clever. It feels intentional.
Yeah.
There's to take another pass and then do this version of it. I would watch this version of it. And I think in the modern era, we love remakes and we love making 3 movies out of 1 movie. Do that. Or 2. Yeah. Who cares? Well, 2 3-hour-long movies.
And they're making Dr. Sleep now, so it's inevitable that somebody's going to come along and be like, well, now that we've made a new Dr. Sleep...
Oh my god, how good would it be if they were like The Shining, a prequel to Dr. Sleep?
Yeah, right? I mean, because and that's also what... I feel like...
What Dr. Sleep needs is the actual precedent for itself.
I don't know this for sure, but it does feel like at the end of the TV miniseries The Shining, the King already maybe had some inkling that he was going to write a sequel.
Sure.
Because he adds on, like...
that scene with the graduation where
which
Ghost Dad shows up.
Yeah, and that's not in the book. Oh my god, can we talk about Tony for a minute?
Yes, please let's talk about Tony.
There's... This movie's so long, and there's probably
too many things.
I mean, there's too many things, but also nothing. Nothing happens that much. There's some good actors who are not terribly well used, except they're turning in really good performances.
So Jason, Elliot Gould has one scene in this movie as the man who hires him. He has one scene. They walk around the yard and talk about things, and Elliot Gould is just dribbling acid down his chin the whole scene. And he's so incredible, and I wanted him to come back so bad, but there's no reason for him to.
No, it's
there's
just
at one point.
in
this one, Steven Weber is writing a play instead of a book, but also he gives up on it immediately. That's a weird difference. But when he's trying to prove to Elliot Gould that he's an acceptable caretaker, he's like, "Plus, I have my play. I'm trying to write a play," and Elliot Gould says, "Ah." It's just so eviscerating.
Elliot Gould's performance in that is so... I was trying to put myself in the place of being, say, like a young person watching this on television in 1997, maybe not knowing who Elliot Gould is or understanding, like, what he's done. Yeah. And so not necessarily... I can imagine a lot of people not processing what he's doing as a choice, but just being like, who is this weird, stiff actor?
Just think he's a really strange guy.
Yeah, it's just like, who is this, like, really strange wooden guy with flat delivery who they got, and not understanding that, like, what he's doing with that performance is amazing.
It's incredible. Sorry, you were going to talk about someone else.
Oh, I don't even remember. We were going to talk about Tony.
Tony.
So having only the Kubrick's film as a reference point.
He's a finger boy.
He's just a finger. He's just a finger that the boy talks to.
Which is great.
Danny's not
so
here right
great
now.
Yeah.
There's just so many choices that Kubrick made about things of like, sure, we could technically show this, but it will look terrible. I'm just going to turn it into a human performance.
In the Kubrick version, he's like, oh, he's a little boy who lives in my mouth. Also, he moves to my finger to talk to me, which is so many more details than are necessary that it seems like it must be from the book. But it's not from the book. Tony's just a guy that floats and talks to him.
Well, that might be a new interpretation of Tony even from King.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because again, like the way that King writes books, we've covered this before, and particularly in The Shining, everything is first person. Mm-hmm. Everything is like from the perspective of somebody. So I could see him in the writing of it, there being no need or even opportunity to describe,
to explain, sure,
what Tony is. It's just, in Danny's interior monologue, and then sometimes he's talking to Tony. But in this version, King makes the decision to make Tony a floating blonde teenager on a green screen.
Real doofus.
He's like an extra from Friends, just floating in the sky.
Yeah. Yeah, in his like non-branded casual wear. Just like, hey, oh hey, bud. Which, Jason, at one point, Rebecca De Mornay goes to she takes him to a psychologist or something, and they talk to him, and he's asking her some questions. I'm sure they say something salient for the plot later or whatever.
Sure.
But during the conversation, the doctor's like, oh, and let me guess, was Tony a real person before you left the town you left? And she says, yes. So did Steven Weber murder that guy? Because at the end, Steven Weber, as a ghost, can appear to Danny Torrance. So is he just a dead guy that used to live in the town they lived in? Or can Danny just see people he used to know?
Well, but then also compounding that is that at the end, Danny is Tony.
Oh, was it played by the same actor?
Yeah, that's Tony.
I did not.
Tony is Danny graduating, and they say Daniel Anthony Torrance as he walks across the stage. So it's his future self being projected backwards, which makes her comment even more baffling.
Yes.
Unless Tony is whoever he was named after as a middle name? I don't know.
Maybe. That is super bonkers.
It's very confusing. And I
was so checked out by the time he was graduating that I may not have even looked at him on the stage to see that it was the same actor.
It was the same actor.
Oh, that's amazing.
That was when I was checked back in. Like, I just kind of checked back in the last 20 minutes to watch because almost everything that takes place in the Kubrick film takes place in the last half hour of this.
Sure. Yes.
But bafflingly, not that much more takes place before it.
No.
It's all just it's just repetition and exposition.
Yeah.
There's a distressing wasp scene where a little boy is being stung by wasps and screaming, and that really didn't sit well with me, but everything is so slow and so belabored and so just like everything has to be set up like 7 times.
Yeah.
And then it's just it's this perfect storm of King's grudge and the asinine requirements of narrative television in the 1990s just combining to form something borderline unwatchable.
Yeah. There are, I think because Rebecca De Mornay's Shelley Duvall, I don't remember the name of the character. Wendy is a character with a backbone and with her own ideas. Mm-hmm. There were 2 to 3 times in this movie where Steven Weber is being a real shitbag, and she's like, we should leave, and he's like, no, I have a job, and I don't understand why she isn't like, okay, I'm taking our son, we're going to town, we'll see you in a couple of months. The only reason I can imagine her not doing that is because she is a spineless wimp, but she's not in this movie.
So, and that was, they sort of had the scene, but I was expecting them to do it a little bit stronger. In the book, she does want to go, and Danny convinces her to stay because he thinks in the way that Danny has perceived things so far, he thinks that what they can do is they can protect his father and they can all work together. And Danny doesn't yet understand that it's his presence that are actually making the ghosts stronger and able to take over his father. So like, and Danny is such a weird, like, deep, intelligent character that he's able to convince his mother that they shouldn't go. And they sort of have that scene in the TV movie, but it doesn't really land. I think partially because, I hate to, like, shit on a little kid, but, like, Courtland Mead isn't that great.
He is the worst. And I think that was the second round, Jason. There was one round earlier where she just kind of decides to stay. And then there's that round, and then the third round is just before Jack smashes up the snowmobile. But she has a good 30-minute window where she's like, I'm going to do this. And he's like, no! She's like, okay. And I'm like, no, you need to stand up for yourself right now. And then immediately he goes and beats up the snowmobile. Yeah. And claims that he didn't. Because in this version, he is half the time under the control of monsters and half the time just a sad guy.
Yeah, it's like this, it's this lurching thing. And that, again, is a much more direct metaphor for alcoholism, where you're like, oh, no, I blacked out and did this thing, but later I'm going to tell myself I couldn't have done that because I'm a good person.
And in this, he explicitly, they even commented early on, the things that are happening to him are the things that happen to him when he is drinking, but he is not drinking. It's just so in your face a metaphor for
Yeah. And that was the other thing, one of the other things, you can just go down the list of the things that King hated about the Kubrick thing. He hated that Kubrick downplayed the alcoholism, and that he hated that Kubrick downplayed the supernatural elements. Weirdly, it was Kubrick who added in the Indian burial ground thing.
Yeah, that's not in this.
That's not a King invention.
Stephen King, for throwing that one at you. The rest, not sorry about.
There's still one in Pet Sematary. It's not as bad. Like, I think you even made the point in Pet Sematary that, like, he at least knows which tribe was there and makes it a specific thing, as opposed to just the generic, like, Indians. I don't know.
Yeah. Who cares?
That Kubrick did. And, like, really, if I was gonna go through with a comb for that kind of shit, like, the Kubrick film's egregious. He puts in the Indian burial ground. He completely shrinks the Dick Halloran role to just saying hi to Danny and then getting stabbed in the back, as opposed to having not that the role is
that's basically all it is in this, Jason. I would say the amount that there is more Dick Halloran in this is proportionally smaller than the amount that there is more movie in this.
I don't know. He gets those good scenes in Florida. Like in the Kubrick version, he literally just talks to Danny and then he's just sitting in a room.
Yeah.
And then he gets stabbed.
That's what happens in this, Jason. We have 5 scenes, and it's kind of funny. We have 5 scenes of him. He's in like a restaurant, and then Danny screams in his brain, and then we have like 5 scenes of him traveling to get there. But they're not. It's not a character moment. It's just him being like, "Oh my God, stop screaming in my head." And then he gets there. What is funny is that in this version, he does the same thing of getting all the way out there, and then gets immediately smashed with a croquet mallet in this one. But then he wakes up at the end so that he can be in the last scene, right? That's the one moment he gets in this. But in Kubrick's, he gets smacked by an axe and is just dead, which is, if you're gonna go through the effort of making a man travel from Florida to a building that's locked in the middle of a snowstorm in Colorado and just immediately be dispatched, it's funnier that he's dead.
That's true.
Kubrick makes it into a better bit. But yeah, he's alive at the end of this one, but he doesn't get more. That's the only more screen time he gets.
No, he doesn't get more screen time, but he does get. Well, no, that's not true, because he spends a lot longer, like, teaching, trying to talk to Danny about what his gift is and explaining things about the hotel. Like,
I'm not sold on your theory.
I mean, I think if you went back through it, there is. I'm not saying it's a great character, but it's much more of a character than what Scatman gets in The Shining.
Maybe.
And then there's the Wendy development, which is like Kubrick does just. I mean, as much as I love Shelley Duvall, and I think maybe Shelley Duvall's gravitas and command of her art elevates her Wendy beyond what it's written to be.
Sure.
there's no doubt that what Kubrick wanted was just a completely broken woman. And that's really what he literally got from Shelley Duvall. Like, she was notoriously wrecked from shooting that movie.
Yeah.
So there's all of this stuff where it's like, yeah, you know, I could see how that could stick in my craw, especially if the movie becomes so famous that then you get blamed for all of that stuff.
Sure.
But it's still a way better movie.
Yeah. There's a scene in the middle-ish, sometime in the middle of this 6 hours, who cares, somewhere in there, where Jack is in the main office and the CB radio, which is off, crackles to life, and his father starts berating him through the radio.
His father is
Miguel Ferrer.
Yes, uncredited, but that voice is unmistakable.
Yeah, you know immediately it's him, but also he just acts so much. Even just his voice, Jason. Yeah. I was like, oh, this man is acting, and it makes me sad about how much everyone else isn't acting in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably because Miguel Ferrer
had no idea. He
probably didn't even meet Mick Garris. He was probably like a B-unit person, just went and recorded some audio, and he's like, all right, I'll just make some decisions.
Yeah, they just sent him a script and a microphone, and he ripped it out, and he is so vicious.
Oh, it's so good.
It's really beautiful.
So good.
For the first 2 hours, maybe 4 hours of this movie, it's just people taking care of a hotel. And occasionally ghost things happen, Jason. But they aren't... I'm putting this on Mick Garris. They aren't smart enough to make them spooky ghost things. Or things that are like prescient or poignant in any way at all. It's just like the camera will move past some people who are doing a thing, and then a swing will swing twice. And you're like, okay... I guess maybe there's a ghost. Or, like, a light will turn off. And you're like, convenient.
The first 7 hours of this movie is essentially just doors closing themselves. That's their one big spooky movie.
Yeah, that's it. 2 hours into this movie,
it happens so many times as a commercial break point.
Like,
the door closed again.
2 hours in, I wrote myself the note, shouldn't something have happened by now?
I, for some reason, just refused to write notes on this.
That's smart. It's because you knew you were trapped for 6 hours.
I just couldn't do it.
This movie, Jason, will not shut up about topiaries. Every sixth shot was a topiary. They pull up to the place and they talk about them for much longer than they need to. And then they keep shooting them. They're like, hey, remember these? Remember these topiaries? Hey, topiaries.
That was a big argument between King and Kubrick. King wanted the topiaries from the book, and Kubrick said, no, it'll look dumb.
That is stupid. Yeah, it is.
And so he turned it into a hedge maze. So again, this movie, every choice is filtered through King needing to really underline his disagreement with Kubrick, and it ruins any judgment he may have otherwise had about how to adapt this.
Has anyone talked to him about this since, to see if... Because it feels like all of his decisions really just underline how Kubrick made good decisions.
I guess. I don't know, man. It
seems objectively like this movie is clumsy and fumbling and not scary or interesting.
Yes.
And so it seems like there would be no way for him to look at this as a failed experiment and proof that Kubrick understands how cinema works, and he and Mick Garris maybe do not.
Well, yeah.
Although he does sometimes. King definitely does sometimes. But not with things he cares about. He only likes to make movies out of things where people scream and then fall and then punch something.
Yeah. I think that I don't think that this was considered a failure.
Okay, but it is.
Right, to us.
Artistically.
But I think it, was generally pretty well reviewed and got awards, and lots of people watched it. And so I think that King probably feels like, all right, I got to do my version, so people can see that and they can choose. And
someone should talk to him in 2019 about it.
The other thing to remember is a lot of people still don't like the Kubrick version either. It's too much for a lot of people.
Okay, but does Stephen King want to make things for tepid people?
No. I feel like I'm coming across like I'm arguing for King's version. I just feel like it's probably not that clear in his mind or a lot of other people's minds. To me, obviously, the Kubrick is so much better as a movie.
Yeah.
But if what I cared about were the thematics of the story, like, if I cared about The Shining as a book, if I cared about the themes of the story, I would hate Kubrick's film, I'm sure. Just like I'm sure there are movies that are technically good, but that do take on subject matter or source materials that I do care about, and I just am like, yeah, that's great. I don't care. That's not. It's they're doing. I'm stepping away from it because I care too much.
Okay.
I can't think of any examples right now, but I'm sure that they exist.
I wondered partway through this why King likes Mick Garris. Sorry, I'm just going to keep shitting on Mick Garris. Because,
Here's the thing, is that it's baffling.
Because when Stephen King directs, it's just people smashing their faces into walls until their noses are bloody. And everything Mick Garris directs is like room temperature pea soup. They are opposite characters as film directors.
Yeah, it's shocking to me that Sleepwalkers is as bonkers as it is.
Yeah.
Given that, but now again, this is television. I guess it might be worth seeing something else that Garris made for film.
Yeah, but
which
he
there isn't a lot.
Direct. It's not just that he's boring. It's like there's no directing happening.
Oh yeah. No, I mean I don't disagree.
There's a shot, Jason. It's just before the topiaries come to life for the first time, where clearly Mick Garris was like, I don't know, you're doing work out here, I don't know, let's roll. Because Steven Weber wanders aimlessly with a broom in his hand, then walks up to a playhouse, sweeps snow off one corner of it, says, work, 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 and then sits down. There was no one directing the movie. It was just good actors unsure of what to do.
Yeah.
There's also a scene where, just before the second time the topiaries attack, Danny Torrance is out making a snow pile, and he sings, I like snow, I like snow, it's such a beautiful thing.
I loved that. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything. I don't know. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Hell to the King is a special presentation of the Cinesthesia podcast, produced by Iguana Donald Studios, and distributed by Split Tooth Media. Music by Loyalty Freak. Hell Tooth.